Welcome to Between Shelves.
where we make connections between literature, theology, philosophy, psychology, and culture.
Join us as we explore the interconnectedness of race, spirituality, psychology, and metamodernism.
Each episode invites you into a thought-provoking journey, unpacking how these elements shape our understanding of the world and ourselves.
My name is Aaron Waldron. We're a religiously traumatized theopoet and a shaman in journey. Our work focuses on creating community and between spaces for religiously traumatized millennials, navigating life beyond colonized religion.
And my name is Rafael Reyes. My work is on the importance of imagination and theopoetics in philosophy and religious pluralism.
We invite you to Between Shelves
To learn,
listen,
and become.
All right, welcome to another episode Between Shelves. Welcome. Today we are sitting down with Germane Marvel to explore the concept of Black Meta-Modernism, an emerging framework that reframes and expands the possibilities of meta-modern thought through the lens of Black and other experiences, history, and culture. So, to get straight into it, Germane, could you describe or tell us how would you define Black metamodernism?
It's a movement, it's a culture, it's a way of being, and it uses diunital logic, which is both and logic, both and thinking, to reconcile, to resolve opposites within a system which provides cognition. So it's a felt sense of cognitive dissonance. Of relieving cognitive dissonance.
Awesome. And so, how did you get into Black metamodernism?
So in a sense, for me, Black Meta-Modernism is just meta-modernism in a sense. Originally, I had come across Shia LaBeouf's, don't know if that's how you pronounce the name, so forgive me if it's not. I came across his rendition of the Meta-Modern Manifesto, the early Meta-Modern Manifesto. And I thought that was by Luke Turner. I thought, oh, that's interesting, and he's a British artist. That's interesting. It's wordy, so kind of like, okay, but I could see what they were getting at. This emotional feeling that they were talking about, which I believe is the resolving of cognitive dissonance, such a sense of irony. But anyway, we'll get to that at some point. And yeah, then I read Hansi Freinach's book, which also kind of made some sense. And all the while, I was still like, to say this, in my university years, I had not done my uni work and actually just read around religions and just learnt different things for myself and used the access to knowledge for those reasons, which didn't help me in my uni course. But in that time, I came across spiral dynamics, and I could see, okay, this was saying something, but it's too hierarchical. It's accurate, but there's something missing that's not quite right, and it's like kind of it hasn't processed the colonial stuff yet. So when I came to Hansi, I saw he had taken a step further than that. I hadn't heard of integral theory before, so he had taken a step further, but also there was something. I was sharing my ponderings and stuff, and I wrote on Medium. I wrote a lot of stuff on Medium. Even writing, I wrote a lot of stuff to work out what I believed and what I thought. And I would share this online in forums, on book.
No, I was really interested in how you developed or got into metamodern reading, talking about spiral dynamics and integral theory. Fascinating way. And Aaron, this is where I'm going to kind of jump in and have a conversation with Germane. I had a similar trajectory. I'm a religion major, theology major, philosophy, right? And I was working my way through integral theory, but in theology, right? What is an integrated theology, contextual theology? And I think one of the problems that I was finding, and I think you were finding well, in one section, I think, and I'll get to what you were saying, was that it's always an either or, right? And when we were looking at, let's say, contextual theories, it kind of says, okay, this is your context and this is what you believe, but it never really went farther than that. And I think this begins to, when you find metamodernism, this begins to speak to your diunital theories. and the triunity ones. And I'd be interested to hear as you continue on that, if you can continue that sort of that journey you went through and how that sort of developed.
Yeah. And yeah, so I was reading, I believe Hansi was one of the early books that I read. And I read it, and it's a great book, by the way. I recommend anyone to go and read the books. I also felt there were less missing, but still bits missing, which I felt needed to be addressed. Especially, yeah, I mean, and then Brent Cooper kind of dubbed it Nordic metamodernism, and then there was the Dutch metamodernism, which was which Luke Turner evolved from. And I probably won't be able to get the names right, but the Moonen and Van der Acker, I believe are the names. And yeah, so there were these different camps, is what Brent was saying from his research, and there was also this potential of a black metamodernism, which seemed to be missing, and we had this whole series of missing metamodernism. Around this time, I was writing my own understandings, and Brent mentioned me in this article, one of the, I think it was a second article I've done called Meta Nothing, which is where I essentially rambled for a long time and hopefully took our consciousness on this journey into nothingness and how it's not really a thing. Well, obviously, I call that I would call it hauntology, and the connections behind that, and what that would lead us onto, and how that would lead us on to going beyond the binary between atheism and theism. Because I was in groups about atheism and theism at the time online, and it's just arguing all the time, and everyone just atheist versus theist, and just like, well, actually, there is a common thing here, and that was my own first step into going into philosophies, and I called this thing that was both theism and atheism, and also neither. I called it metatheism. I was calling it everything meta, just like, kind of like, just also kind of a play on the whole, how meta is just like, it's overused sometimes, but so I did a whole series of, I've got a whole load of meta concepts, which we like. One of them is metatheism. And yeah, so that was and then, in groups, whenever I try to bring up anything about, in the Facebook groups, whenever I try to bring up anything about race or identity, or the dynamics within the groups of whose voices were the loudest, whose voices were accepted, and whose voices were questioned, and I guess in integral theory terms rejected as green, and it got me kicked out of a few groups, basically, unjustly, let back in because it was unjust, and then kicked out again because it didn't make any sense, and it's because I kept butting up against his shadow, basically. And so I was like, okay, if everyone's saying what I'm doing is not metamodernism, and it's not, and no one's really paying any interest in it, then I'm gonna call it Black Meta-Modernism. I'm gonna do my own thing, because this is the problem that everyone has with what I'm doing. Is they see it's too, it's too woke. Basically, that's the term now that we use. It's like, not, I don't know. But anyway, yeah. And so when I made Black Meta-Modernism, then a few people, came towards the group. A lot of women, older women, who are tired of the scene and the dominance of masculine energies, would say, "I've seen what's happened to you. It's not right." And some men as well. I have to say, some men as well. And I support what you're doing. And one person, Jen Pierre Rich, told me about this guy, and his name was Vernon J. Dixon, and he came up with an idea called diunity cognition. He had a paper which I don't think I'm going to be able to tell you verbatim, but it's something like the diunital approach to black economics. So this is like the 60s. And in it, he was basically explaining that in his mind, he sees that the African American community in America, the black community in America, would use a diunital cognition, where it's profound, and how it's necessary in order to survive, and it comes from this survival, and it's not actually what was pre-colonialist thinking, which was something a bit different, but it's through the lens of the dichotomy which is so prevalent in the West. Another guy who I may not remember, and forgive me for that, but he was a peer of Vernon J. Dixon. I believe it's Edwin's. If you want to check later on in Black Meta Mode, if you Google my name, Black Meta Mode, and it's in there. But he really looked at this, and he broke down the different, what he called the dichotomous dialectics of the West. And so this was the four main set of ways of thinking, ways of approaching the world, ways of interacting with the world, the dialectics with the world, and breaking things down, and how that would lead to separation, segregation, genocide, for example. So that was really the grounding. And so what I was able to do then is I was able to take this both and, which was part of, quite central to this this meta-modern expression that was happening. At least that's what Hansi was saying, and at least that's what integral theory was saying. And oscillation requires a both and as well from the Dutch camp, and we can get onto oscillation later. And I think also reconciliation as well. I think I would like to hear your guys' opinions on as well. And so I thought, okay, so actually there is an actual case in academic literature, not only with Vernon J. Dixon, but also with Moyo Okodeji, who, and forgive me if I'm not saying the name right, Moyo, also with Moyo Okodeji, who independently coined the term meta-modern. Independently coined the term meta-modern. And I believe it was before Van der Acker and these guys did. And so that in itself made me question, okay, what's going on? And that, in addition to the work that Brent Cooper's done on missing meta-modernism, goes into Borgman, who talks about the bifurcation between meta-modern and hypermodernism, which has happened, I believe, and I think that's where some of the differences in types of meta-modernism come from. There was another guy whose name, I believe, Gonzalez as well, who talked about meta-modern aliens in Jerusalem, and who also referenced, I believe he referenced Black Latinx, forgive me if my terminology is not correct, communities and artists and their expressions, and how they were using literary expression to assert themselves against a world which has now become dystopian fiction in real time. And that bears ultimate resemblance to what the Dutch school would then later call metamodernism, as a literary approach to the oscillation between two poles, which is what Croker, around the time that Borgman was writing, Croker would call hypermodernism. And so for me, doing this archaeology, and this is why I think metamodernism is all about this kind of ontological, archaeological discovery of itself and the world and our connection. And in doing this deep dive into metamodernism, how it came about and how parts of the academic tradition have been missed and which parts have been missed. And then it just showed me that actually this needs to be pressed. And so despite having pushback from some POC and Black members of the community, who I think kind of take umbrage of me doing something called Black Meta-Modernism, like I'm doing this, like it's about all Black people, like I'm speaking for all Black people. I'm very conscious of this. I've even questioned about maybe changing it to diunital philosophies or Germane Marvel's philosophies, because maybe it's just my, but then I've been advised not to by some people, who are opinion I hold very highly, who I know here personally in London, and they're also in Black Meta-Modernism groups. And also the fact that I was able to piece together a tradition of Black Meta-Modernism without any of the references to the Dutch school, to the Nordic school, to any other form of meta-modernism, and piece something together which not only was up to par with the other traditions, but actually in some ways shows a later stage of meta-modernism, which some people who are quite established in the scene in Facebook groups have said, hey, maybe what you're doing is after meta-modernism. So for me, this makes me feel that, okay, so what this is something that we need to aspire to, because I can't say that I'm there where I would say what is the Black meta-modern stage in my personal model of I can't say I'm there, because my state pops all over the place. That's what it's about. That's what the human condition is about. It's about the interaction of different states and different events and different times. But I digress. So I'm now very thankful to Jason Storm, who I think is he's got one of the most solid reference books for metamodernism, A Guide to Metamodernism, how to do metamodern theory, I believe. And himself and with another member of the metamodern community have made the Metamodern Theory and Praxis Journal. And so I'm thankful now to have a little place in there for Vernon J. Dixon and I believe it's Edmund Nichols, I can't remember.
That's incredible. Thank you. Raphael, did you have something you wanted to touch on? Because I might shift.
He's talking about a lot of things, and as you were talking, Germane, I'm looking up certain things. Can you tell me a little bit about hypermodernity and the difference between metamodernism? I have a piece of it, but I thought if you can help me clarify that a little bit more, that would be helpful for me. Because I was thinking more along the sides of the hyper individual, like in Baudelaire, I think his name, who wrote Simulacra and Simulacrum. Simulation and Simulacrum. I think that's what it is. You know, the Neo, the film that the Simulacra and Simulation that we get in the Matrix about this hypermodernity. And I could be wrong. I could be confusing the two. But if you can just break that down a little bit, because for me, the way I was seeing it was that everything is hyper individualized, and then everyone has any object, its purpose is found in the function that I give it, which removes any form of theology purpose, like in a general sense, and kind of then saying, okay, why is that problematic then, and its results? I have some ideas, but how does metamodernism begin to, especially Black metamodernism? Like I said, there's a lot of things that came out from when you were talking. How does Black metamodernism help move beyond that?
Yeah. So, I'm not the most academic person, and some of the work I do is I try to start my speech now. Some of the work I try to do is to try and bridge the gap so that when I go back home to Rockworth, which is kind of where I grew up in this account system, I can kind of tell the guys what I'm doing. And not just sound like I'm too abstract, you know. So I don't quite understand the aspect of function. I can only understand it from my framework, unfortunately, which is how I try to understand stuff. And I would like to understand it more because I'm lacking something and not understanding it. You're helping me with that, so thank you. What hypermodernism symbolizes a transition from a really objective, hyper-objective, which inter-objective, systemic, exterior, material kind of ways of being, which don't account for the interiority that all things seem to have in some way. And I believe that this is where the limitations of science also reflect this in the broken model we have, where it's kind of in pieces and we haven't quite got the connecting bits. And it's because I believe that because all things have an inner force, which is also expressed interactively with the outside as well. Yeah, I'm pausing because I unfortunately, from quite early on, started coming up with from meta nothing.
You know, that's
Cosmological,
interesting.
kind of look at things.
I apologize. I
No,
didn't mean to
it's
cut
all right.
you off. And I just want to make a note. What's interesting is when we talk about race and hypermodernism, hypermodernism seems to get away from something called essentialism. And essentialism, at least in the Western context, is so problematic because it applies hierarchy, right? And that hierarchy always gets based on race. So when you look at authors like Bell Hooks, she praises postmodernity, of which that's where hypermodernity falls there, because it allows ourselves, right, whether you're Latino, Black, Asian, list goes on, to be able to create something of the self. And there is, but we're forced to kind of rely on what's there. And there's a self-interiority in that. And that's why I find that interesting in the discussion as we go from postmodernity to metamodernity. And I say there isn't an essentialism, thank goodness. I'm no longer held within a hierarchical framework. And there's a different framework that I can use. It could be cooperative, right? It could be layered, but those layers are all a part of who I am. And so, you know, I'm fascinated at this part because it's valuable. I can create identity from that, but I am also, go ahead.
So I agree about the limitations of essentialism. I also believe that anti-essentialism has limitations as well, and it kind of leaves the gap, which a lot of post-modernity quote does. I would call postmodernity rational plural. I can get into that later, but just keeping this in mind might help. So, whereas hypermodernity I see as a great example of modernity is the culture wars in negative. I see it as the back and forth between modern and postmodern. There's a lot of like the parable is anything that's anti-woke is taking postmodern methods and applying it to postmodern methods. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're breaking down something that is, you know. So yeah. So for me, hypermodernity is us being stuck in that, and the only real resting between this is the bit in the middle where we're like kind of tense because we're being inspired. So it's this cognitive dissonance. So the for me, and I recall hypermodernity like is pluralisms, you know, it's part of the green interview. And then meta-modernity for me would be resolving this cognitive dissonance, being able to hold the space for that ambivalence. So if it felt an embodied thing, it's to have the capacity to feel the rage, to feel the justified rage, and channel it not into something that would destroy myself and my community, but into actual revolutionary practices which will persist over crisis and persist beyond the crisis to set foundations for new work and traditions and cultures, you know? So for me, this is the difference. And this is why for me, there are some of the earlier stages of meta-modernism. So I believe there are stages within stages. And my model has a stage in the half step, mythical, rational, or rational, in meta-modernism, I believe there are many stages to meta-modernism. You've got polymodernism, and you've got the early one with the Dutch school. You've got polymodernism, which I would put somewhere after. You've got Hanses, which is in there somewhere. And these all offer different parts. However, the perspectives that they take on are limited, and that's because of the position of marginality, you know, the position of being contained within a culture which consumes you, which consumes your stories that you can hold about yourselves, you know. So anytime, like this is where intersection comes into play, anytime that I can be identified by society in a certain group, and in a way that is dominated by another group, then in a way that says, you know, you're not worthy, any one of my identities where society says you're not worthy, you know, that's not as worthy as this, then that sets up a cognitive dissonance between me. Each soul knows, you know, each soul knows that they're worthy. When the soul doesn't know they're worthy, it's because something's happened in the environment, which is, you know, and so, yeah, all these myths split us apart. So that's why by thinking it enables me to be like, okay, yeah, society tells me I am this. My friends see me as this. People who walk past me in the street, the lady who clutches her bag sees me as this. You know, my neighbor who calls us on the police, or my mum and my brother for walking past because he just moved into the neighborhood, he sees me as this. I see myself as this. Yeah, and being able to hold all that whole space for all of that then helps others to hold space for that. It means that when others come to me with stuff, anytime I experience something and I can overcome it, when others come to you with something, then, you know, you can hold space for that, and you can grow, you can help other people grow because you can, you know, take their emotions and kind of like, yeah, share it with them in a way that is, yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. I think I'm loving everything that you're talking about, because I'm in agreement with you. I highly value what postmodernism has done due to modernity and the way it marginalized or hid, right? So I'm grateful for the Foucaults and those who've done the archaeological work. You know, when you were talking about cognitive difference, and when you're talking about, you know, this is what this society says about me and this is what this group says about me. And I value that highly because oftentimes we don't, because we're in that space, it's very difficult to form identity if we're not able to pause. There's these two terms that I think, what's the author's name? His name is Mark Fisher. He calls it the weird and the eerie. That's some of that cognitive difference. The weird or the eerie is that is not like me. And we have sort of like this pause of judgment because of this difference, or there's something that's just not quite right. And what metamodernism is doing is saying that's okay. And we kind of have to sort of welcome it to pause judgment, right? That's a postmodern piece, right? Jacques Derrida, the France, that suspension, but it's also one that invites over. In that, I resonate with what you're saying. And Aaron, I don't mean to take over, but with the questions, if you can just speak maybe just a little bit more on how you incorporate Black history in it. And I think you mentioned Vernon J. Dixon as a critical scholar to sort of set the foundation. I'm going to use Black history, culture, use Afrofuturism, Afropessimism, and these other aspects to ground your meta-modern work. Could you just speak just a little bit to that?
Might have to speak a little bit, but I might have to ask you to ask me the question again.
Okay, yeah.
First,
just to speak a little bit more, like you mentioned how Vernon J. Dixon, right? Vernon J. Dixon was valuable in redefining and setting up this Black meta-modern history that you've been talking about. I guess you've laid out some of the Black meta-modernists. What are maybe some other important critical points or context, historical context that are important for you in establishing a Black meta-modernist?
There's a guy called Sheikh Diop. That's Cheikhanti, I think is the Diop, Diop. Guy's got a university named after him in Senegal. Yeah. He had this. I wrote a paper. I co-wrote a paper with AI. I did a lot of editing, so AI is involved. A lot of it is copy pasted, edited the hell out of. Referenced in part called The Third Cradle, and then it's got a long subtitle. I did 3 of these, which I do recommend checking out. Triptych. He came up with this 2 cradle theory. This was kind of in response to the idea of taking away the cradle of humanity from Africa and placing it in the northern hemisphere. I think he started a bit further north, but in Mesopotamia. Cheikhanti Diop said, well, actually, there were 2 cradles. There was one in the southern hemisphere and there was one in the northern hemisphere. The one in the southern hemisphere was the first cradle, and it kind of birthed the one in the second hemisphere. And he said there's a stark difference. Oh gosh, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting it right. I may be incorrect on this, so please go and check the 3 cradles where I've detailed this a couple of years ago. It was either him or Wade Nichols, I believe, said that there's a stark difference in the environment between them. Cheikhanti Diop saw there's a stark difference in the environment. The southern cradle was a optimal cradle, and the northern cradle was a suboptimal. Scarcer resources and harsher terrain. This led to animal husbandry being more popular in the northern hemisphere, and it led to just agriculture being more popular in the southern hemisphere. And this led to matrilineal cultures in the southern hemisphere, which is not matriarchal, but it's where the mother's children bear the line. Things are passed down to the mother's children because agriculture is easy for men and women. And then in the northern hemisphere, as the animal husbandry, that required men because men could do that all year round. And it was just So I'm trying to not get much into gender. So all year round, so that led to patrilineal, and that's a stark difference. I believe it was either Wade Nichols or the guy who I can't remember. I think, or I can't remember. Said this difference also shows the scarcity led to a scarcity mindset, which led to either-or thinking. And in the South, it led to not diurnal thinking, but now it's diurnal thinking after colonial, something before which was more harmonious. So that's, So I think that's interesting. One other thing as well was that because of the scarcity and the response to the scarcity and the trauma that led to the scarcity in the northern hemisphere, there was empty space. And not using the terminology properly, please check the thing. Come to Black Meta-Modernism group on Facebook, and I'll find the receipts for you, but it led to an empty perceptual space where humanity was forced to take a step back from ourselves as subject into more as object. If I'm out on the trail and, and we haven't eaten for days, and mum and, everyone is back and I've got to bring this food, and someone's injured and the food, empties perceptual space and allows me to make that, it can be recognized, as we all know. But this then accounts for why existentialism, all in the Northern Hemisphere, the applications of nothingness. There's a whole meme about when the West seen nothingness is like, oh, what's going to happen? It's kind of like it's really scary. And then when the East see it, it's like it's all serene, And it also always, as usual, misses out the South. And the South kind of is like nothingness. What do you mean nothingness? What do you mean nothing? I don't see nothing. Do you see nothing? Go try to eat nothing,
Hey, listeners, are you ready to challenge the way you think about identity and the stories we tell about ourselves? In this episode of Between Shelves, we're diving deep into the world of Black Meta-Modernism. It isn't just a way of thinking, it's a way of feeling, creating, and becoming in the 21st century. We're thrilled to be joined by Germane Marvel, an artist and a pioneering Black meta-modernist thinker. Together, we're diving into the fluidity, paradox, and multiplicity of Black identity in a world where traditional narratives no longer hold. From art to philosophy, culture, and spirituality, we're unpacking how Black meta-modernism disrupts outdated frameworks around race, belonging, and self-expression, opening up new pathways for reimagining the future. Whether you're a seeker, a scholar, or just curious about the evolution of identity in our ever-changing world, this episode has something for you. Catch the latest episode of Between Shelves, streaming now on all your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Let's explore the in-between together. And now, let's return to our compelling dialogue with Germane Marvel as we continue exploring how Black meta-modernism reshapes our understanding of identity, creativity, and the ever-evolving journey of becoming in the 21st century.
Yeah, so, I think that side of the history is interesting. Thanks. That's what I forgot the first time around. On Afrofuturism, something quite interesting, and I'm part of a group. Yeah, I'm a musician. Like, I play the keys, but I don't get in public because my friends are all a lot better than me. But I do partake in around 7 years. I've partaken in event that's happened weekly in South East London called Steam Down. And what we do is we do live improvised performances, so not a jam, so live improvised performance. The music that we play, the style of music we play, we call it Afro-infinitism. Now, when I've had taken time over the years to question Ananse, who's the founder, he's a sax player, plays a bit of flute as well. When I questioned him, okay, why Afro-infinitism, he said, the term Afrofuturism wasn't made by someone from the African diaspora, And actually, if you look at futurism, it's closely aligned to white supremacism. And so if we didn't call it that, then why are, And so then he says, so what? And I was like, okay, fair enough. But why Afrofuturism? Like, I agree with the term. I like the term. I've actually used it, so I'm about the writings, and it makes sense, and I can account for it. And my sense of time that I got from the whole meta-nothing can account for it. But what are you saying? And he's actually, he bought me a book up there, which is like the orange book, just in the top left here. It's a book by Sunrise. It says, well, Sunrise talks about infinitism. And infinitism is a sense of the future and the past being in the now. Yeah, that's the essence of it. So at these live performances, we proceed by honoring tradition from the past, being brought up with the genres of music that we've been brought up with, tracing all the way from grime and drill all the way back to one drop. And, we've got a guy who comes called Jali, and he's like from like something like 50 generations of Kora players. And we're just lucky for him to pass through because he knows Wayne from another venue called Passing Clouds back in the day in East London, And yeah, so we've got this tradition, and then we meet it with what we're all coming up with, which is, an amazing group of musicians who passed by and called the place home, and, are kind of branching out to new traditions of music, and I'll give you a few names later. And yeah, they bring this together we bring it together into the now, and we give people I used to call it my musical therapy and spiritual warfare training weekly. Some people will call it church, but a non-secular church, but very much spiritual. Yeah, and I don't know. London is not an easy city to live in. Spaces are very hard to come by. Spaces, community is hard to keep. Living houses are hard to find. Having a space for everybody, and that people. It's been very inspirational. So that's what I would say. Afro-pessimism, I would say it informs and it gives us a way to move past naivety. How can I explain this? It's very, very, very relevant today. The best way I can say is the film The Heretic. I don't know if you guys have watched The Heretic, but the way that the politeness, the cordiality, the plausible deniety, all tools of rationality and objectification and objectivity, they actually can be used and manipulated to work against us against our own interests. Yes, Afro-pessimism gives by emotionality because the Diurnal cognition does not see that empty perceptual space. It means that we can. It's not I think, therefore I am. Which is not even what he said. He said I doubt, therefore I think I am. But it's not even I doubt, therefore I think I am, because the doubt actually comes from this empty perceptual space. It's I sense, I feel, I think, therefore I am. There are other steps along this chain of reality, and apart from just so. Yeah, so this Afro-pessimism then takes this emotionality as a fuel in a diurnal way. It's not just putting in a plural way. It's not just putting the rationality on a pedestal. It's taking the emotion and the rationality, and then Kabbalistic terms, meeting them in the middle with imagination and moving forward from there. And Afro-pessimism is like, okay, so if we were at war, and it was a slow war of attrition, like one might say we see in Palestine over the years. If we were at war, then what would this be? And I think that's very informative because it means I can be kept on my guard. It means I don't, I can protect myself, but I can treat it in a both-hand way. And this is very crucial. I'll just say this piece and then I'll hand it back. I lived in a boat with a bunch of people. One person stole from another person, and I didn't know who it was. There could only be 3 people, and it wasn't me. And the guy moved off, and I had to live with these people. So I had to say in front of them, hey, I don't know which of you did it, but I know one of you did it. So I had to treat you all as if you both have, as if you both haven't. Where that Venn diagram of my behavior in relation to that meets, then that is how I will proceed with you. I will not accuse you of being a thief. I will not lend money, and I will not leave valuables around you until I know what's going on. And I feel that's how we have to move in this day and age. Not nice. I am not a nice person. I endeavor to be kind. And that's finding a balance of what's, good for me and good for you. Being nice is just what's good for you. To hell with me.
That was amazing points. Thank you, Germane. As you were talking, we were thinking of what you were bringing about in terms of this. It's so interesting, too, because we wrote like a small book about the theopoetics of chattel slavery, basically slavery in America and everything. And we were talking about this concept of whiteness and how it's more than just a physical description. It's something that it's embedded in our thoughts. So it's so easy these days for someone on the outside to appear Afrocentric, but on the inside, they have been colonized. They have colonial ways of processing choices and seeing reality and understanding it. And it's interesting because you mentioned this trauma. That's what we want to bridge. We also have shared this perspective, which is very difficult for people to kind of huddle around because it does require less emotion. And when we're talking about things that are so sensitive as slavery, and especially here in America, it strikes like an emotional chord most times, and people start becoming defensive. But we love what you were saying, because if we're able to get beyond that a little, we can then start to process this in a more reasonable way. Critical thinking can then prosper and ignite. We can break free from what we've been conditioned. But at the same time, it's so interesting for me and theopoetic for me that the colonizer, in a symbolic way, is like one of the most hurt, traumatized forms of humans among humanity. And, when you're bringing up this idea, this framework that suggests that there was two thriving areas and only one got highlighted, but one gave life to that. And it correlates with the burning of the libraries in Africa. And, and a lot of our great philosophers that contributed incredible works in theology and philosophy came from Africa, were African thinkers, So it really does parallel what you're saying, and also enforces it, supports it, just using different words or a different perspective. But we just wanted to add that it's so divine that you would bring that up. And we ourselves in our own private works have been working on this perspective that really didn't come from our environment. Our environment suggested that something else, that there's no, the issue is not that the colonizer's traumatized. No, we have to overcome the colonizer. We have to defeat them and all this. And when we start to think through meta-modernism, we start to think, wait, and, like this could be true, but we can think beyond it. We don't have to just settle for this, but thank you so much for contributing that.
A few things come to my head if I can offer them. They're from Black Meta-Modernism, but there's the concept of, so for me in Black Meta-Modernism, the black stands for more than race. For me, it's even, like, as I said, it's just meta-modernism, the black stands for more than that. For me, it stands for the symbol that blackness has taken within Western cultures and dichotomous cultures. The shunned, the occulted, the unseen, the shadow, all of that stuff, which is, and so this could maybe come to, okay, so how can I start reframing? I'm having these conversations, Sam Harris in the Future of Reason group, for instance, in Facebook, and I'm having these conversations and people are, as you're saying, they can't really respond to this. So I try to break it down. I just try to understand things from the roots. So I understood that it's probably coming from a place of ignorance. Like, even if someone's doing it intentionally, it's intentionally being racist and they intentionally believe in essentialism, there's still an ignorance there. That, the phobias are come from an ignorance of me not actually really knowing these people and projecting my stories onto these objects and treating these people as objects instead of having an interior world. Yes. And what I see is that ignorance would lead to bias, which would lead to prejudice, which would lead to discrimination. Bias is like more implicit, unseen. When it comes known, it becomes a prejudice. You see, to keep having that in your world, sometimes with my family, this stuff, they don't always like, but I gave my brother this one and he was like, okay. And he was like, yeah. And I was kind of just talking about it. I was saying kind of everyone's kind of a little bit racially ignorant. Not racist maybe, but racially ignorant. He was like, yeah, but you're not, Germane. I mean, you're like, I'm like, nah, bro. Like, we all have these biases and prejudices and that we like, and so this is not, so yeah. When I came out with this, I was called House and Racist Against White People on the same day by the same person, who's also a friend. But this was the reaction I was getting from people, that I was like, kind of, because they weren't understanding it. Am I excusing racism? No. People have 400% responsibility for what they do, but the environment is 100% responsible for the choices that they make, Yeah, for me, that's the meta-modern individualism. Individualism can be grounded by the idea that human beings are only indivisible from their environment. In every other way, we are divisible. Why the Rastas use I and perhaps you use we, Aaron, because we like, I'm not who I was yesterday. This is why I also like to go beyond equality, so that I'm a complete segue, because I'm not who I was, half an hour ago. I was a lot more nervous half an hour ago, now I'm like, I'm enjoying having a conversation. Equity is a different thing. It was just for me to be anxious back then, because actually anxious is a response that is the physiological response is the same as excitement, preparedness, and getting ready, So actually, that was the right thing. Now it's the right thing to be comfortable and do what I'm meant to be doing. So there's that. So this whole pipeline could have a Jedi meme, ignorance leads to bias, leads to prejudice, leads to discrimination. Put racial, sexual, whatever at the beginning of those, there you have it. Now, on the end of this, what I've come to recently understanding is that, this is another segue, that you can tack emergence onto the end of it. After discrimination, you can tack emergence onto the end of it. Because discrimination itself is not necessarily a bad thing. For example, I don't like calling it positive discrimination. I prefer calling it restorative discrimination, which is affirmative action. Not necessarily a bad thing. Between us and good company, I believe it's myopic. I don't think it could have lasted any. I would have a backlash. Taking it away without safeguards is another thing. But I'm not going to go down to that road too much. Emergence is what comes after discrimination in the chain. And this is because emergence comes from a perspective of ignorance. When I think that things are emerging from some things, because there is something I don't know about the underlying state of the system that is producing this. It's why I call it eminence instead of emergence. Once I know what it is, it's eminence, emanating from this thing. And that's why I call my thing the theory of eminism. Eminence, the diunital philosophy that unites transcendence and immanence. If you want to read about that, Metamodern Existentialism, I believe, is the paper that is in. Yeah, so there's that. That was emergence thing's a big segue. It's quite recent. But after I did the bit about that pipeline for ignorance discrimination, then I realized, okay, let's break down racism and break down black and white along the lines of what I'm saying in Black Meta-Modernism. Why would we talk about light supremacy when that's just triggering everyone I want to talk about? This actual myth that is persistent, but I can't talk about people who met better most because it's just very triggering. Like, I'm accusing them of something that's very close to their identity. It's like not a nice thing to do people. And sometimes it's necessary and it has to be done to protect myself and others around me, but it's like not really helpful in a lot of cases with good faith, well-meaning people who just want to get past it. Yeah. So I came up with the idea of light supremacy. It would just be, it's a hypothetical thing, but it's very plausible in the fact that, humans prefer the light to the dark. You can see this all throughout the Bible, especially, I guess, in the dichotomous societies. It's all throughout the Bible. And it really came to me one day when the Queen, I've moments go up before, was saying something about love, light, and hope, and something like that. And I was just like, okay, yeah, because these are the good things. I always knew this was kind of the way it went. I'd written a poem about it a long time ago and showed it, and I actually posted it after the pipeline, ignorance to discrimination pipeline. And then I came up with the light supremacy thing, which is, very early on in human culture, at some point, the night would have been a very terrifying thing, especially when I came across the interperceptual space later. But when you add it to the interperceptual space, then it creates this kind of, I don't know what to call it, but it's like a phobia almost, of the unknown, of uncertainties, which will come from scarcity. If you're in a scarcity-based environment, that's what's going to come, because you want to be sharp to navigate. And it led to, I might have lost my track, but it led to, but it led to a break between ourselves as well and nature, basically. So because if I'm afraid of the dark, if I avoid the dark and pedestal of light, then when I close my eyes at night, when I even think of my internal world, because I don't know about anyone else, but my internal world is an infinite dark space, which is actually quite comfortable, but can be very scary when you think it's an infinite dark space, which I cannot go to the end of. Like, if we're separated from that, then we are separated from our own nature, which is part of Mother Nature. So we are separated from Mother Nature, and that's where the separation comes from. And that's where this whole destruction and the attacking of the avoiding and the allergies. This is and so for me, it just made a lot of sense for that to be a contributing factor to racism and essentially, to colorism and anti-blackness on the scale of colorism, and what my mum called in uni pigmentocracy, the existence of pigmentocracy. So that's just what came up for me when. Thanks for listening.
No, thank you. Raphael, did you have any closing thoughts? Because we got to wrap up to respect everyone's time. This was an amazing dialogue, man. It's hard to cut, but maybe we could do this again. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to say we still haven't talked about the song Long Time Ago. And we had it in our notes to talk about, and we didn't speak about. So we want to invite you again, definitely, to continue this discussion. I just want to say thank you. It's interesting the way you chain things together, but the way I was chaining things together, you brought that two cradle theory was so valuable in thinking between notions of scarcity and notions of abundance, and then how we get to this need for AI and stuff like that. I think that's amazing, and we can continue that discussion on our next podcast. But the notion of abundance and the term infinitism that you now hold on to, ideas and things can be grasped from anywhere. There is no one space, right? That which with scarcity says, okay, we could only get it from here. We need to grab everything we can. But that it comes from everywhere. As you are talking about these things, I myself was in a mode of scarcity, but this author says that, but that author says that. But then I started noticing, wait a minute, no, it comes from our context, the universe, everything that's around us can bring forth these ideas, which at least for me that's amazing. This thinking in terms of abundance, that even the ideas are shared, but it comes from these diverse sources. It brought up to me this Deleuze's notion of, even though we're like multiple and singular, we praise the difference because we still come together in a certain way. In our nomadic selves, we come together sharing these similar ideas that we can come together around and grow, right? But there is some discrimination. But from that emerges these new ideas, these new shared experiences. And so I was grateful for how you brought back this notion of abundance in that two cradle theory piece. I'm deeply appreciative of that because it's so needed. That is so needed in the world of academia, that everyone's trying to grab on. This is my idea, and everything so forth. That we grab it from an abundance of sources, abundance from spaces, and not only in academia, you name it, wherever we go, and the posture then we sort of need to have, and the way we express ourselves shifts and changes, and we can honor and praise and find joy in our colleagues and our others to say, that's awesome. I love this idea. I love the way you developed it and framed it and brought it up, and how it comes out, and I've learned something from it. So
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you listening and giving me feedback, and thank you. I look forward to the future.
yes.
Definitely. We'll email you to try to set up another time to do another episode, try to work around everyone's time. But this was very, very enlightening. Thank you so much. On a side note, our audience is going to appreciate what you're offering and what you're talking about as well, because we're not hearing this in those spaces like you mentioned. So on a side note, thank you for doing the work that you do. Seriously, just to piggyback off what Raphael was saying, it's much needed. And you probably already know that. So thank you.
It helps to hear, to go through the sticky bits. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, just to the podcasting community, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you on the next podcast.